Hi there, and welcome to my Fashion Stories Box podcast, a podcast about stories in fashion history. I am Catherine, and I'm so glad to welcome you here. Let's discover together interesting facts about fashion and history and fashion history. Why did I choose the Touraine headdress as a research topic, are you going to ask me? Isn't it a bit uncool, old-fashioned, dusty, even nationalist? In fact, not. And the objective of this episode is to demonstrate all the beauty original fashion accessories can have. In this new episode of my Fashion Stories Box podcast, we will travel back in time to the beautiful region of Tours in the Loire Valley. For this research, I decided to adopt the attitude of an archaeologist upon the discovery of an item on an archaeological site. Thus, we will first examine this item in an objective manner, looking at its anatomy, the different elements entering in its composition. Then, we will add some elements of context. How was it worn? By whom? And with what? The next stage, which corresponds to one of my favorite activities in the analysis of garments and accessories from the past, will be to look at the hidden meanings, the use of ornamentations, in our case the embroideries, as a non-verbal communication tool. Indeed, fashion, even if for some seems to be quite superficial, was, and still is, a communication tool. And finally, I will try to answer one of the main questions I had. What can be the origins of this local headgear? I have some hypotheses I would like to introduce you to. But before we start, I would like to tell you a story. The story of my interest for this item. I was born in the city of Tours, and my family has been living in the Touraine region for generations. I was raised in a small village located in the north part of the Indre-et-Loire department called Saint-Christophe-sur-le-Nais. The Touraine region is not particularly known for its regional dress, nor for its folklore. Nevertheless, for me, everything started with a bag in which my paternal grandmother put away the headpieces worn by women in her family. She was born in a town named Saint-Vigny-sur-l'Athan, located also in the Indre-et-Loire department. When I came back from my many years spent abroad, having in the meantime discovered the fabulous world of fashion and particularly the world of fashion history, I decided to have a closer look at the content of this bag. My paternal grandmother is not among us anymore to tell me the stories of these headpieces, by whom they were worn and for which occasions. I had to rely on the few available publications on that topic to learn more about them, adding on my own analysis. Now, if you will, let's open together this bag of curiosities. First, let's have a closer look to our headpiece. The Touraine headdress is composed of three main parts: the front, the lid in French, the middle part, the passe in French, and the back. The front part, or the lid, is the part in tulle which extremities are decorated with Valenciennes lace. This part is embossed on the sides. In French, it's called paillage, because this technique was obtained with straws to modulate the tulle in the desired shape. In the front, the lid is flat. The lid covers the front part of the headpiece to frame the top part of the head. The next part, the passe, or the middle part, is the transition between the front part, the lid, and the back of the headdress. It's made in muslin and has a crescent shape. The back part is the bigger part, aiming at covering all the back head. when you would meet a woman wearing a Touraine headdress, if you saw her full face, you will see only the lid. If you saw her from the side, the pass and the back would be visible. And if you saw her from the back, it was the back of the headdress you would notice the most. To these three main parts, you need to add the tightening cord used to secure the hat on the head to prevent it from moving. Made from a tightly weaved cotton, this cord came towards the top of the head where it was crossed and then attached in the back of the neck with a knot. By the end of the 19th century, a silk ribbon was added to hide the tightening cord and to add also a luxury touch to the headdress. Before being assembled, these different parts have to be created. For that, you need tulle, Valenciennes lace, muslin, embroidery, everything in white. The tulle and the Valenciennes lace are used to create the lid. The muslin is used to create the pass and the back of the headdress. The pass and the back will first be embroidered by an embroiderer, and then the three parts, the lid, the pass, and the back, will be assembled by a linen seller. Both the embroiderer and the linen seller were professions practiced by women. And to embellish a Touraine headdress, you needed Valenciennes lace for the lid and embedded in the embroidery of the pass and the back. The patterns embroidered on the pass echoing the main pattern of the back. The embroidery will evolve over time, which can help to date a Touraine headdress. Between 1814 and 1870, a period corresponding to the Second Empire in France with Napoleon III, we can notice a very fine and delicate embroidery. The Touraine embroidery, also known as white embroidery, Vouvray embroidery, or Gros de Tours, which built the reputation of the region in terms of embroidery, appeared after 1870 and will be used during the first decades of the French Third Republic up to the First World War, after which the Touraine headdress will fall out of fashion. This headpiece has been worn by women from the region of Tours, mostly during the 19th century. It started to fall out of fashion at the beginning of the 20th century, and after the First World War, only older women would wear it. I have the wedding photo of my paternal great-grandparents dating from 1902, and already my paternal great-grandmother didn't wear it. Few young girls were wearing it. And on another wedding picture from the 30s, featuring my paternal great-grandmother, my paternal grandfather and his sisters, none of my female relatives were wearing the Touraine headdress. Only the older women. This is a proof that this headpiece was indeed a fashion accessory, following a life cycle similar to the one we can notice in a modern society. Garments and accessories being for a moment at the top of the trends, with everybody wearing them, and sometimes later completely out of fashion and discarded, to maybe come back in fashion in the future. Fashion and trends follow a cyclic scheme, coming and going. So why not the coming back in fashion of the Touraine headdress? And as we are now talking about fashion, let's have a look at how women would wear this headdress and with what. The main characteristic of this headpiece is its color, white. To make the embroidery popping out as well as to prevent greasy hair to dirty it, the Touraine headdress wasn't worn in direct contact with the hair. Indeed, one has to note that even if the concept of hygiene was evolving, it wasn't the same as nowadays and people didn't take showers every day. So to start with, women would style their hair in a bun, parting their hair in the middle, flattening it with Vaseline, and attaching it in a bun in the back of the neck. Then they put on a black undercap or protection cap, which had two main purposes. The first one was to protect the white headdress from the sebum secretions from the hair and the scalp, and the second objective was to bring out the white embroidery by displaying them on a black background. At the beginning of the 19th century, the headdress was to hide all the hair and the ears. Then, starting from 1840, the trend changed and the headdress was worn more in the back, revealing the front hair. Then, to add more volume in the back of the head and to highlight the embroidery, a roll band called mouse, souris in French, was added underneath. The hair was still nicely flattened and straightened. And the more we go towards the end of the 19th century, the more backwards the headdress is worn, clearing the top part of the head and the ears. The middle parting tended to disappear, and the front hair was styled in a puffier and curlier manner. Some fashionistas would even wear curled wigs to add volume in the front. Fashion is fashion, has been fashion, and will always be fashion. And what was the general silhouette of a Touraine woman during the 19th century? What did she wear alongside with her headdress? To complete her appearance, the Touraine woman would wear jewelry, most of the time made from gold, silver gilt, 925 sterling silver plated with 18 carats gold, or in fix, gold-plated brass or copper. Earrings, particularly drop earrings, brooches, watches and their chains, as well as the Janet cross, were the main jewelry you could find in the jewelry box of a woman from the Touraine region. When it comes to dress, there is no proper regional costume for the region with a particular garment or print. The basis was the peasant costume worn before the French Revolution. In his book, The Folklore from the Touraine region, Jacques-Marie Rouget, a renowned local folklore expert, lists the following elements composing the Touraine women's dress: a large black coat, a hood to protect the head and which could be lined with silk or velvet, a headscarf or fichu, a squared piece of fabrics measuring between 1.10 and 1.20 meters on the side, one folded in a triangular shape with one point hanging in the back and the two others crossed on the torso and secured at the waist with the apron. The material used for this fichu was white muslin or embroidered tulle, particularly for important events as weddings. It could also be found in colored silk or cashmere. For every day, women wore a printed cotton fichu. An interesting fact was that these scarves could have two different patterns in the front and in the back to give the illusion that the woman had a large quantity of scarves. Everything was a question of ostentation. An apron was worn, often in a dark color, in silk or in taffeta, without embellishment, and it was worn on the top of the dress to protect it, and was a bit shorter than the dress. And finally, clogs, worn during winters with socks on the top of the stockings. The lines of these garments followed the general evolutions of our dresses during the 19th century, as we can notice from pictures from different eras. The headdress, as we saw, was widely worn up to the First World War, and the dresses worn with it followed the Parisian fashion of the Belle Époque period. As I was telling you, in fashion, nothing is left to chance. Nothing is insignificant, and particularly in the past. Everything had a meaning, a functional use, as well as a symbolic one, and even more during the 19th century when the social conventions were very strict. Let's start with the symbolism included in the headdress itself. Not that I am looking for hidden meanings everywhere. However, and you will be able to see it by yourself, there are hidden meanings everywhere. The headpiece worn by women contains a meaning deeply linked with the concept of honor. Thus, in case of hair pulling, in the figurative sense, when two women were fighting, taking off one's headgear was equal to symbolically insulting one's conversation partner. Pulling off the headpiece of one's opponent meant that we despised her. In both cases, it was never a good sign. And if a woman would take the headdress of another woman and exhibited it as a trophy, it was the sign of her lost honor. And of course, a bareheaded woman with nothing on her hair was considered as a woman of easy virtue, as she was displaying her hair, symbol of temptation and encouraging lust. In her book, dealing with clothing habits in revolutionary France from 1780 to the 1800s and entitled Les vêtements de la liberté, abécédaire des pratiques vestimentaires françaises de 1780 à 1800, traitant du vêtement révolutionnaire et de ses enjeux psychologiques, esthétiques, financiers, médicaux et idéologiques, the author, Nicole Pellegrin, mentions, quote, "To have self-respect implies for a woman to remain head-covered in front of her equal or of her superior." Unquote. Knowing it was unwelcome for a Touraine woman to be seen her hair detached, starting from her first menstruations, generally considered as a transition between childhood and adulthood, she had to wear a headdress for every occasion. A Touraine woman could possess up to 20 headdresses, one for each event of a woman's life. A headdress for every day to work, a headdress for Sundays and for religious celebrations, one for the town assemblies and for family celebrations, a headdress for markets and fairs days, a wedding headdress, a headdress worn by married women, a mourning headdress, a half-mourning headdress. These different types of headdresses gave information about the event in question, about the life stage of the woman, single, married, widowed, all without asking questions. Quite practical, right? The embroidery also had its own language, a bit like the language of flowers. Depending on the quantity of embroidered elements on the back of the headdress, depending on the type of pattern embroidered, we could obtain many information about a woman. I will start first by explaining the symbolism of the numbers. And when it comes to embroidery, we have three main numbers coming back regularly: the number 7 and its multiples, the number 1, and the number 2. The number 7 is associated to the 7 gifts from the Holy Spirit, which, according to the website of the Catholic Church in France, were formalized by Thomas d'Aquin and were the following: wisdom, intelligence, science, strength, advice, devotion, fear of God. These gifts also corresponded to the main qualities which were expected from a woman during the 19th century. The number 7 is not insignificant and possesses different religious, cultural, and superstitious meanings. It is considered as a magical, sacred, divine, spiritual number, a lucky charm number, part of the folk unconscious, no matter the religions or the cultures. The number 1 is associated with single life, virginity. Headdresses showcasing one single rose were worn by young single women. The religious meaning of this number is linked with the beginning, the unity. There is only one God. The number 1 is also synonymous of perfection. As for the number 2, it is generally associated with the couple, a notion of sharing, of love, or at least of a life now lived as an entity of two people. Once married and received as a wedding gift, the woman would wear a headdress featuring 2 roses to symbolize her status change in the society and to signal she was not single anymore. The number 2 is linked with wisdom, the relationship between man and God, as well as with the double nature of the Christ, half divine, half human. It can also symbolize the masculinity and the femininity, the composition of a traditional couple, as well as the good and the bad, as in the yin and yang. Now, let's move to the interpretation of the embroidered patterns we can see on the pass and on the back of a Touraine headdress. Depending on the eras, on the occasions, and on the trends, the patterns will change. We can find animals as birds, dragonflies, butterflies, bees, fruits as strawberries, red currants, raspberries, grapes, cereals as wheat, corn, and flowers as roses, lilies, bindweeds, carnations, fuchsias, cornflowers, or daisies. I will focus on the second half of the 19th century and its main patterns, the rose, the wheat ear, the grape, and the wine leaf. The rose in particular, and all flower patterns in general, are the most frequently used for the ornamentation of the pass and the back of the Touraine headdress. The rose flower is usually associated with the Touraine white embroidery and is the symbol of the region. The rose is considered as the queen of flowers and symbolizes love, beauty, and hope. The wheat ear is the second most frequently used pattern. Wheat is associated with abundance, wealth, prosperity, peace, and fertility. Wheat is the original cereal from which flour and bread, the vital food, are made. Wheat is also a lucky charm. Grape and the wine leaves can be found particularly in the region of Vouvray, which is a wine-growing region in the Loire Valley. Grapes and wine leaves were embroidered on the headdresses of wine-growers' wives to testify from their husband's occupation, but also to pay tribute to Saint Vincent, the patron saint of wine-growers. The embroidery, its meaning through the patterns, the people who wore the Touraine headdress, every involved element contributes to anchor this regional item in a provincial countryside society and underlies the relations and beliefs people of that time from that particular region had with religion and their culture, their rural origins. I would like to add that the quantity of embroidered patterns, the quality of the embroidery acted as a proof of the family wealth. A servant couldn't have a more beautiful headdress than her mistress. Moreover, the ornamentation of the back of the headdress informed about the importance of the occasion. For everyday headdresses, embroidery could be absent or featuring patterns in 7 multiples. The most beautiful headdress was the one a woman would wear on her wedding day with a crown of orange blossoms. After all, there are so many things to say about the Touraine headdress, right? And the best part is that what I'm currently sharing with you in this episode is just the results of preliminary research I have been conducting. I still have so many things to analyze, to compare, to research. For this last part, let's try to answer my main question. What is or what are the potential origins of the Touraine headdress? You will tell me that the answer is quite obvious, from the Tour region, of course. But what about its historical origins? Let's see that together. Throughout my readings and observations, however incomplete, I came up with several hypotheses. The first hypothesis I have is linked with the medieval origins of the Touraine headdress. Daniel Schwetz, in his book The Headdress and its Imaginary Representation in the Touraine Folklore, briefly mentions its medieval origins. During an unexpected encounter at the Tours National Library, he explained that this was the generally admitted theory. Not having had the time yet to check this theory with a more in-depth study of visual and written sources of that time, I can't neither disprove nor confirm it. What I can say is that if we look at a fashion history book, we can notice the high diversity of headpieces worn during this long period, which are the Middle Ages. First, based on the Roman practices consisting of a simple veil put on the hair, this headgear became more and more diverse and sophisticated over time, some of them being even inspired by the findings brought from the Crusades. Medieval women, no matter their social standing, wore something on their head as a signal of modesty, but also to protect it, particularly for women working in the fields. The headpiece based on the Roman veil seems to have evolved into a headscarf and a cap for practical reasons, as well as under the influence of the elite and their changing fashions. The second hypothesis I have is the milkwoman's hat. This is another theory I found mentioned in the book Popular Traditions in Touraine, Their Evolution Over Centuries. The author, René Courceau, describes the clothing habits of the Touraine region inhabitants. He mentions that for women before the French Revolution, the practice was to wear starched lace handkerchiefs on their heads, as well as the milkwoman hat, also called the Jeannette hat, a big hat attached with a ribbon and a knot, clearing the roots of the hair above the forehead and hiding the ears with pleated lace flaps. For him, this was the historical origin of the Touraine headdress. This hat is named milkwoman hat, as its name states it. It was essentially worn by milkwomen. We stay here in the rural origins of the headpiece. The third hypothesis I have is linked with the character of Marie Antoinette. I dedicated an episode of my Fashion Stories Box podcast to the last Queen of France and her impacts on fashion, which you can find on your favorite podcast streaming platforms. The 18th century is a century of social and political disruptions, culminating in 1789 with the French Revolution. This 18th century is also called the century of enlightenment, and for our topic, one person in particular will play an influential role, Jean-Jacques Rousseau. One of his books, published in 1761, will put the rural world in the focus, Julie, or the new Héloïse. Through the story of the heroes, the life outside of the walls of the castle of Versailles is depicted with a touch of exotism, romanticism, and picturesque. Between 1774, the year she was sacred Queen of France, and 1793, the year she was executed, Marie Antoinette will launch more than 20 different fashions, going from the most eccentric and voluminous styles to the simplest one. This change towards a simpler fashion, coming back to a more rural lifestyle, is said to have been influenced by the birth of her first child, by a personal will to come back to the simpler lifestyle of her childhood, and also by the evolution of the economic and political situation in France. In 1782, she will have made built a farm in Versailles, not far from the Petit Trianon, called the Queen's Hamlet. She will have a garden and a family of farmers from the region of Tours, for the little story, to take care of the animals and vegetables. She liked to receive her closest friends in this place, dressed in a manner inspired by the countryside clothing habits and by a very romantic vision of this countryside lifestyle. The gowns will lose their exaggerated volumes, will feature an apron in the front, and a shawl will be worn crossed on the bodice, encircling the waist and attached in the back with a knot, as per the peasant way. The patterns will also be very countryside-inspired, featuring lots of flowers. As for the headpieces, they will be heavily inspired by our milkwoman hat, of course, embellished with lace and ribbons, for a more luxurious touch. And what about the French Revolution? Representations of the years of the Revolution and after show us women wearing hats echoing the milkwoman hat put in fashion by Marie Antoinette. With the abolition of privileges and the end of the sumptuary laws forbidding some social classes the access to luxury items, the bourgeoisie and the peasants now could buy, providing they had the money for, lace, silk, and embroidery. If you try to visualize, even in an incomplete way, the historical origins of the Touraine headdress and its evolutions over the centuries, we can notice some backs and forths between the different social classes. In the Middle Ages, it was a headpiece seemingly worn by all women, no matter their social belonging, to then being limited to peasant and countryside women, to then after become a fashion item worn by women from the aristocracy in the years preceding the French Revolution, to finally evolve towards the universal headgear and to end as a social marker for Touraine women. In fashion theory, we talk about the trickle-up model, when a trend starts in the lower social class to reach the elite, and about the trickle-down model, when a trend starts in the higher social class to reach the lower ones. And here, what we mustn't forget is the reasons why we get dressed, we style our hair, the different functions which will go from the most functional, to protect my head, to the most superficial, to show my social status, my belonging to a community, a religion, my personality, my wealth, or my families. And what about the future of the Touraine headdress? Currently, nobody wears the Touraine headdress, at the exception of folk groups. But this doesn't mean it might not come back in fashion. I wanted to imagine what might be the future versions of the Touraine headdress, and for that, I played a bit with artificial intelligence. To discover the results, I invite you to visit the Instagram account of my Fashion Stories Box podcast. It's finally time to conclude this long episode. And who could have thought that this relatively unimpressive and basic headdress would be full of so much meanings, origins, and impacts? From now on, you won't have the same look on this item. Or so I hope. So, what did we learn today about the Touraine headdress and its origin? Studying headdresses or any other items from the original costume is an in-depth work enabling us to understand the social context evolving around it, including the presence or absence of laws forbidding or allowing some fabrics and/or embellishment depending on the social class. The evolution of the spreading of fashion and its democratization through the social classes, as well as the influence of economic, political factors, the development of commercialization and communication means, the influence of production and transportation on the availability and on the creation of the demand for a particular item, and of course, the transmission of values, of the position of women and men in the society, of codes, of nonverbal messages. For me, the Touraine headdress possesses all the characteristics of a fashion phenomenon influenced by historical, economic, and social factors, which over time became a stereotyped representation of the region. This is only the first template of a more in-depth ongoing research on the subject and couldn't be, in any case, a final and exhaustive document. This is also the reflection of my own observations and conclusions based on already published books on my own knowledge of fashion history. I am not pretending to perfection nor to tell the only truth on the matter. My contribution is here to invite you to think and to debate. I would like to thank the association Histoire and Patrimoine from Saint-Christophe-sur-le-Nais and its president, Mr. Philippe Larue, to have given me the opportunity to share these results during a conference exhibition organized on November 24, 2023. A more detailed publication on my thoughts about the Touraine headdress has been published for this occasion. Feel free to contact me should you want to purchase it. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode of my Fashion Stories Box podcast and that you learned a bit more about the French local heritage. And as you could notice, the original Touraine headdress is full of surprises. Feel free to subscribe to the podcast wherever you listen your podcast, to connect with me on Instagram and Facebook to complete the podcast with some visuals. And if you like my podcast, feel free to leave a comment or a review. I would really appreciate it. I am Catherine, and this is my Fashion Stories Box podcast, a podcast about stories in fashion history. See you next time for a new Fashion Story Box.